it's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to train for. It's a difficult thing to win.
And you can say that with authority because you've done it yourself.
Yeah. We certainly know that from British Rowing. The Learn to Row programme clicks on the website go up massively over boat race weekend.
I'm guessing there's a little bit of a challenge around audience education where you've got some people that are diehard fans that don't need you to explain what a cox is. And then you've got other people that are like, what's the person doing at the front of the boat? Like, why are they shouting at everyone?
And it's really interesting, actually, because, of course, slightly biased, I think the light blue is a beautiful colour. But actually, what seems to sell is really interesting is people like...
Hello and welcome to the Sports Pundit podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working within the industry, I started this show to host conversations with decision makers from the MLB to the ICC, unpacking their strategies and industry shaping ideas.
On today's episode, I'm joined by Siobhan Cassidy, chair of the boat race, an event recognised as one of the world's oldest and most famous amateur sporting events. The boat race is regularly attended by over 200,000 spectators at the banks of the river and watched by millions more on television. This year's race will take place on Sunday, the 13th of April. And although now chair, Siobhan is previously a winner of the race herself whilst at Cambridge. In today's conversation, we're going to explore what it takes to deliver one of the UK's most iconic sporting events, how they landed an extremely unique new title partner, as well as how she goes about balancing innovation with history and legacy. So without further ado, Siobhan, welcome to the Sports Pundit podcast. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm excited to get into this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you, Andy.
Yeah, you too. So I mentioned very briefly there in the intro about your success previously as a participant. So I think maybe where I like to start all these conversations is just to get a little bit of an understanding of your journey and how you ended up in the role that you're in today.
Yeah, it's amazing, really. I sort of look back to my first encounter with the boat race was on a 1970s TV set. We used to watch sport on the TV with my mum and dad and brother. Be rugby and cricket. And the boat race, Wimbledon in the summer, some amazing events to watch and be inspired by. And it was actually watching the boat race on that coverage, rough water, drama, sinkings, that I just thought it just looked amazing. And it was different. I had never seen it before. I just assumed you had to go to Oxford and Cambridge to do it. And I thought it was cool, that sort of drama of there is only one winner takes all, one-off opportunity. It just felt something very special. And I think my parents thought I was academically ambitious, but they didn't really realise it was because of the sport that I started talking about. I'd really like to go to Cambridge. And actually at the time, Cambridge were being beaten miserably by Oxford. So I kind of thought it'd be really good fun to go and to win. And it took a long time, and I didn't take up rowing until I was 13 or 14, and I changed schools, and I was in a town where there was a river, and I picked up rowing. And I just fell in love with it straight away. I had enjoyed sport, lots of different sports. And my parents were very keen for us to be outdoors growing up. So I did lots of different sports growing up. But when I started rowing, it was all consuming. And I love being on the river. It's a beautiful location. You're outdoors a lot. You do lots of different parts. So it's not just on the water. There's weight training, there's running. So there's variety to it as well. You're learning a skill for yourself. So there's a lot of skill acquisition, but you're also having to do it with other people. So you're trying to perfect what you do whilst also trying to work with everyone else so it works. You can't just be doing only the right thing. You have to be doing it with others. And so it's always really challenging. And there was always something to learn. I went to university in London. I just missed out on the junior team as a junior when I was at school, which was really disappointing, actually. And, at the time then, I think I was spending a lot of time rowing. And my parents and some of my friends thought, really maybe it's time to give up if you're not good enough. But I had some great mentors. My first coach, Doug House, and then Linton Guys, actually, who was a teacher at the boys' school in town and was coaching me in my gap year at Bedford Rowing Club. Really inspiring and just encouraged me to keep going regardless. And actually, I love what I was doing regardless of the results, actually. Mm-hmm. Went to University of London where I did under 23s and student games, which were great experiences around with different people, again, from beyond London, that whole mixing up and learning and traveling with it as well. And then came to Cambridge to do a teacher training, PGCE, in 1994-95. So my boat race was at Henley-on-Thames. So it's certainly very exciting to see many years later when it moved to the Tideway to be on the same day as the men's race, actually. So yeah, it's good to see great progress in the event.
Yeah, nice. I think you mentioned there, like from seeing it on TV to then taking up rowing. I'm curious about that journey because rowing has a bit of an image of being this very kind of elite sport, maybe not the most accessible. So how did you go about taking your curiosity from seeing the race and translating that into participation, and how's that, maybe that transition evolved over time? Because I assume that's probably quite a big focus of yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it was seeing it. So I think, first of all, if you see it, so that's the great thing about being on the BBC. It's free to view coverage of an event that most people, if you're not really near a river, you might not see it. And then you get to be, as I was, sort of thought it was just incredible, this really weird mix of stuff. And certainly, I'm sure every year, and we certainly know that from British Rowing, that actually on their website, the Learn to Row program clicks on the website go up massively over boat race weekend. Because I think the boat race reaches more people than rowers. There'll be obviously hardcore rowing fans, but it's to the many, many who aren't, who are interested in the British tradition of it, this quirky thing between Oxford and Cambridge, and who will just watch it on a Saturday or Sunday afternoon. So that's the opportunity the sport has to reach new audiences through that. And actually, it's really great as a sport. You don't need any equipment when you turn up to a rowing club. And up and down the country, on stretches of water, lakes, everywhere, there'll be a rowing club. And you don't need any special clothing. You don't need your own equipment. You don't even need your own trainers. When I tell people actually that inside the boats there are trainers that are stuck in and everyone shares them, they're kind of horrified. But that's literally it. You don't need anything. It's old trousers and a t-shirt you can turn up in. And the sport is run mainly by volunteers, actually. We have a great governing body, but also the sport itself, there are volunteer coaches up and down the country who are really keen to welcome young people and masters, so older people who learn it and take it up later in life. And it's a great sport for that. It's non-weight bearing. And so actually, we find that once people see it, they sort of think, I might like to give it a go. And the clubs, when they go to, you always get a warm welcome. I think one study showed a few years ago that because boathouses have great big doors, but because the equipment behind them, they can seem quite closed off. But actually, that's just the facility. You need to have big doors because there's big pieces of equipment coming out. And when they're closed, you don't see anybody or you don't get to engage. But I think during lockdown and people got out on riverbanks and certainly in London up and down the towpaths, but across the country, people would have walked past clubs and noticed them a little bit more, I think. So yeah, we're very proud to have that position that, as a sport, and we feel a great responsibility to the sport as a whole, that the boat race coverage does shine a light on rowing, and that does reach more than just the rowing fans. And actually then the work that we do with our trustees, so we have the Oxford Cambridge Rowing Foundation, who are trustees of the boat race, and they have the boat race fund. And so that, over the last few years, has been supporting, again, programs across the country. We don't feel we're the experts in that. So we support people who work, on the ground in their community. So we've been up at Firhill in Glasgow, Leeds, various places, enabling, I think in 2022, there were 1,000 young people who got involved in the sport through the support of these programs, which has been brilliant, actually. And then this year, again, for the second year, we're going to be having the youth boat race, and that will take place the week before the boat race. And that's with young people who are from the boroughs that border the boat race course. So Hammersmith and Fulham, Wandsworth, and that'll be great to see them, racing down the course, being umpired by boat race umpires. And so they're getting a little taste of being part of it more directly. But we're hoping that, again, other young people who might be watching it will think, maybe I'd like to have a go at that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I guess for people that aren't aware, right, the boat race is always contested between the same two teams, Oxford.
It is.
So as well as maybe just giving a little bit of an overview for anyone that isn't as familiar with the event, I'm curious how you, as the kind of custodian of that event, use that to inspire activity at a lot more than just those two universities, right? Which are obviously exclusive universities that you need to get certain grades and you need to be studying at their institutions, I guess, before you can compete. So like you say, there's a lot of other opportunities for people to get into rowing. So I'd just be curious to understand how you navigate that and make sure that people are aware that although these are the two teams racing on screen or just on the side of the riverbank, there's a lot of other opportunities to get involved in. And like you mentioned, I think the foundations that Oxford and Cambridge both have. And so they're, I guess, doing a lot of work to try and inspire participation, not just in their local area, but also much broader than that.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is we're really fortunate with the amazing coverage that BBC do. So there's on the day. But I think I'll take a step back to you and look at the season as a whole, because that might give you a bigger picture of the boat race. You're absolutely right. You know, you have to be a full-time student at Oxford or Cambridge to turn up to trial at either club. One of the amazing things about Oxford and Cambridge is once you're there, a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to learn to row because they don't live near a river. At Oxford and Cambridge, there's 43 colleges at Oxford and 31 at Cambridge, and each of those has a boat club. And at the beginning of every academic year, there'll be thousands of young people who will start rowing for the first time when they come to Oxford and Cambridge. So you've got that really broad base. I mean, they're the two biggest learn to row centres. And it's part of that structure of university life, that collegiate academic, but actually sport being a really important part of well-being for the students and for life. And actually, that's something that doing some work a few years ago, University of London, and they modelled that when the University of London was setting up to have collegiate sport. And we see that across the country, don't we? That there's maybe the elite sports at universities, and then they have the participation getting people into sport if you haven't done it to that level of school when you go to university anywhere. And of course, as part of the boat race, you can be either an undergraduate or a graduate. So those young people who've learnt to row at other universities, Edinburgh, Oxford Brookes, University of London, Exeter, Nottingham, Bath, Bristol, everywhere will and also come. So there's this massive pool of people turning up every year. It's a real challenge for the coaches. So if you think about this season, you've only got 6 months where you need to prepare for March. The students come back in September, so ahead of term, and they'll start trialling for a seat. And resources are limited at the clubs, and so it's a well-managed process, but it is a process of where you're performing as you're going along through the process. In December, the clubs will have what they call trialates. So you race your own team. So there's 2 men's boats and 2 women's boats racing down the course. That's to practice the course, and we put that on YouTube. So, a lot of it will appeal to alumni and hardcore fans. But actually, again, that's a great opportunity. We promote that as far as we can so that people get a sense of the season of the race. It's not just one day. And then actually through February and March, it's fixture season. And the fixtures are when Oxford and Cambridge will race other clubs and university teams from the UK and sometimes from Europe in order to practice before boat race day. It's the tideway itself is a very difficult place to row. And I think if you ask anyone nowadays, you probably wouldn't organise a race on the tideway between 2 people side by side. It's got bends, you've got the stream, the weather, the waves that will come up if the stream's going in the opposite direction to the wind. It's a really challenging course, and it takes a lot of practice, particularly if you're not used to rowing there. So the teams come down probably every other weekend from about mid-November to practice, just to go out practicing. And there are clubs in Putney who give some space to Oxford and Cambridge crews so that they can come out on a regular basis. And it's then that we'll sort of try and highlight those points of the fixtures to shine a light on what's going on. So we're trying to showcase the year and to reach new audiences in that way, so that actually we have a responsibility to do as much as we can for people to get under the belly of the race, really, to understand a bit more about it and the sport itself. We also have a mini docuseries, which we can touch on a bit later. The Oxford and Cambridge trustees, the foundation, they will then be looking to support, and they have been doing for sort of 20 years, 25 years, supporting projects. They were probably one of the first funders of London Youth Rowing, which has gone on to be an incredible charity getting young people into sport across London. And I think they've been really ahead of doing that, actually. In small ways, you won't maybe see it as their name, but they've been funding projects. Fulham Reach Boat Club, which has been hugely successful in reaching underserved communities, has also been funded by the boat race as well. And so we've sort of relied on supporting experts in their field into that community sport element, so that people can get access to a sport that we think is just great. And there are lots of skills and leadership opportunities that you can take from sport into business and life, into the classroom and beyond.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Like, you talk about this being like an amateur event and like people taking up rowing when they get to Oxford and Cambridge, and obviously that's a model that's much more common, I guess, in the US in terms of the collegiate sport. We don't really have that to the same degree in the UK, right? Like, I played cricket at university, but you'd be lucky if there was 10 people sat around watching when you're playing.
Yeah.
Versus like, the thousands that come out for something like the boat race, or in the US, you have fully packed stadiums that are
Yeah.
on par with professional teams. Now they've obviously gone through a transition like very recently in the US, where L has allowed money to start flowing in and coming into the athletes. Like, how do you grapple with kind of having athletes that are amateur, but obviously there is an element of revenue generation that you're trying to create around the event, whether that's through sponsorship and ticketing and all that stuff? Like, how do you manage that? And is there any kind of lessons you're taking from the transformation that you're seeing stateside at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the stateside is a really interesting model, isn't it? That the whole process of that, actually, you're absolutely right. Sport is supported by people in their town, isn't, you kind of, it's not necessarily even alumni who will go along to watch the, American football, swimming, tennis. And actually, the programs there will support a number of sports. And actually, in terms of rowing, women's rowing in particular has really benefited from Title IX in the States, where the funding that comes in through American football has to be split equally across a number of men and women. And rowing, women's rowing, you'll see teams of 80 women in the States, which is really exciting. And so there's some great opportunities to get great support and experience actually alongside your education on a sporting perspective. I think here we know the British system is different. We don't have a sports system that has a sport that brings in centrally to a sports department at any university here, the millions that they will see and will see packed stadiums, which is a great pity, but it's just not the model UK has. So I think culturally we don't have that. I can't see Bucks, British universities and colleges, changing that, or there may be an opportunity for them to look at that across all universities, but I don't see that happening in the short term. Certainly, the boat race, we're mindful of that, but within the UK sporting landscape, it's a real privilege to be part of this. I think the students recognise that. To have a huge crowd watching you brings other pressures, of course, of performance. And I think they see that's a great opportunity. And that's why it attracts so many people from across the UK to try to get in Oxford and Cambridge to come and do it and be part of it. And it gives it a great opportunity to sort of keep that tone that, yes, it is an amateur sporting event. So we as a company are set up as a not-for-profit. Or essentially that's what we are. We generate enough money to run the event, and of course the event is free to attend. So when we're talking about hospitality spaces, we have 8 miles of towpath around the course, which you can't close. And this is what's interesting about the event, actually. I think it's free to attend, so anyone can come and watch it, which is brilliant. And you might have seen the London transport posters over the years since the 1920s, where people are being encouraged to come to the boat race, on the tube and the buses. It's free to attend. And those images of the sort of 20s and 30s, the men's boat race, where there were boats on the river and there are people crowded, that's still the same. There aren't as many boats on the water, but the banks are crowded with people who come for a great day out. That's London's party by the river. And that isn't going to change. But again, as a small company tasked with running an event, we need to look after that footprint, or certain areas of it where we see there are key points. But our fan parks are free to attend. So we have one in Hammersmith and one in Fulham. So again, people can come in and there's no cost there. But of course, that's expensive to do that, to make sure that we're running a safe event, not just on the water for the athletes, but also off the water. And we want lots of people to be able to come. And it's great. So our sponsorship covers that. And there's some, we need to pay for some things for the clubs as well. And they're doing their own fundraising as well. And of course, the university structure in this country is very different, isn't it? Because universities, and certainly Oxford and Cambridge, are very focused on academic excellence, teaching, learning, research. And they certainly see sport as a key part of that. But I'm sure neither would want to be supporting rowers above everyone else. And so there are, they see the importance of sport as part of the student experience and well-being. And the boat race is fantastic for both universities. Actually, one of the students in Cambridge was out on a dig for her archaeology PhD out in Ethiopia. And she said she was out there and she had to be wearing some rowing kit. And this chap in the middle of nowhere said to her, "Oh, the boat race." And she, "How do you know?" He said, "Oh, Cambridge, I listen to it every year on the radio." The reach of the boat race is huge, and it reaches completely different audiences that you wouldn't expect. And that does come back because of this coverage from the BBC, which is amazing. But I think keeping and retaining, that's where part of that innovation and holding on to the heritage of the event is that balance for us, and sort of staying true to what we are, which is a free to attend event competed for by students who don't get anything out of it apart from, the life-changing experience that actually it is being part of it, whether you win or lose.
Mm-hmm. So free to attend. You mentioned sponsorship as one way to kind of offset some of the cost. Like, what are the key revenue streams that, like, because I guess usually ticketing would be up there as one of the main ways for a sports rights holder to monetize their event or their series of events. So if you're not getting money from ticketing, like, is there an element of hospitality, which is where you are charging people for certain areas, or how does that
Yes.
break?
Yeah, so it's very small. So again, we don't own any buildings. And so we're really fortunate to have the rowing community so supportive of the event. But we do host 2 areas, one in London Rowing Club and one in Thames. And we do sell some tickets, but not very many. But we hope that people would be interested in coming to do that. But that's only a recent thing that we've done. And actually, of course, there are some spaces where made available to friends and family at the finish and the club members themselves in Mortlake. Then at Fulham Pier, the sort of the Riverside stand at Fulham, that's free to attend downstairs. And then there are some options for people if they want to. And we've had great support from Fulham enabling that. So yeah, we don't have tickets. We have a small amount of hospitality. We have our merchandise and licensing range, which is really exciting. So you'll be able to see, again, that's a sort of new piece we've been doing. And you can get that online if anyone would like to buy some. And they'll be in person as well on Boat Race this year. So that's a sort of small way that we're sort of reaching into that sphere there.
Mm-hmm. And with like merchandise and licensing, how much of that is the boat race and how much of that is Oxford and Cambridge? Because I would imagine, like, I mean, you see a lot of tourists, for example, wearing Oxford University hoodies or hoodies. Like, they both have global brands that are well recognized around the world, and that's definitely helped by things like the boat race that kind of amplify that rivalry. And also, it's one of the only collegiate sporting events in the UK that gets covered on TV, so it's definitely helping them from a marketing perspective, get their name out there. But how does that break down? Is this merchandise that specifically has the boat race IP, or is this merchandise with Oxford and Cambridge on it?
So we have all three. So we have specifically boat race and merchandise, and then we have Cambridge University Boat Club merchandise and Oxford University merchandise. And it's really interesting, actually, because, of course, slightly biased. I think the light blue is a beautiful colour. But actually, what seems to sell is really interesting is people like burgundy, and that's also inspired by the Harry Potter thing. So the thing with the boat race as well is it really inspires a different way of looking at things. It's that sort of mystique of the Oxford and Cambridge universities that people do like from abroad, and they see that as a real positive. And so those sort of colorways that you might see reflect what our audiences are actually buying, which is really interesting. So yeah, there's a bit of everything there for everyone, hopefully.
Is there a direct link to Harry Potter, or is that just something? I know that one of the dinner halls, I think, in Harry Potter was filmed in Oxford.
Yeah, they used a lot. Yeah, that's right. No, you're right. They used some of the sets were at Oxford, which is amazing. So there's sort of some scenes that are set within the Oxbridge colleges or Oxford colleges, actually, Christchurch, and some of the outdoor scenes as well. I mean, they're beautiful locations, and of course, the people abroad. That's partly what inspires our international audiences. Really, is that it's one of the great exports of this country is education, and people come from all over the world to study here, which is what we want.
Yeah. Do you think there's like potential opportunities to look at partnering with, whether it's like other IP holders in the future? Like, I mean, it's not too far. Harry Potter World, I get the train into London Euston, and what junction is in between. So you see a lot of people in Hogwarts scarves at Euston Station that are on their way to Harry Potter Land or have just been. And then you've obviously got King's Cross and platform 9 3/4. So I'm curious, like, is there ways for you to potentially try and like almost tap into these other kind of rich British kind of traditions or heritage? You mentioned Fulham as well, and I think the new stand at Craven Cottage now has a sort of element against the river potentially.
Yeah, it's an amazing view from there. So yeah, they've been really great. We've got that downstairs bit, and it was open. That was open for the first time last year, that the tow path, so that the path, the whole length on either side of the Thames path around the race course is open to the public. And actually downstairs at that Fulham Pier, people can come in. It's beautifully kitted out with screens. So you've got a great view of that Fulham Bend where, we've seen the last few years some amazing action in the race with the Coxes steering unexpected routes. And that, you get to see almost just from the start if you're standing outside, and then you can see them going away past Harrods Depository, underneath Hammersmith Bridge. I mean, it's such an iconic, so many great landmarks on the course. And actually, when you think about West London, it's beautiful. We're so lucky to have that blue space in West London, as much as the green space around it. We have, in the morning of the boat race, we'll have a traditional boats festival. So the livery halls in the City of London, they come down. They've all, the Waterman's Hall, the cutters will come. There'll be some traditional old crafts. So there's activities to watch all day. And in terms of sort of tying up, I mean, I'm sure there are opportunities that we'll be looking at as we go forward, but it's sort of getting the right ones that are right for us, that make sense for someone else as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. We've previously had Roddy Campbell from the Australian Open on, and like a lot of that conversation evolved around sort of like this like Neelandification of sports in terms of like trying to create like a whole festival around it, right? And obviously people come for the tennis, but people are equally there because there's amazing food and drink, and there's amazing music, and there's paddle and all these other kind of like things happening around it. M&M's doing activations and Red Bull doing activations. Like they've really like leaned into this opportunity to fully activate across Yarra Park in Melbourne. It sounds like there's an opportunity as well here where you have a lot of people coming to spend time in a beautiful space, and obviously the boat race is what draws them in, but there's an opportunity to activate a lot around that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're sort of conscious of that balance, and that's partly, how do we, to your point about heritage and innovation. I mean, last year, the boat race brought in somewhere between 13 and 15 million to the area. Now, we don't see that directly. It goes into the boroughs, which is fantastic. We're across 4 boroughs, Hammersmith and Fulham, Wandsworth, Richmond, and Hounslow. And actually, people are coming in, they're seeing West London as a destination. And actually, we're working with our partners there and our stakeholders to do that together, because actually what's good for them is good for us. We may not see that direct financial input directly to ourselves, but actually it's retaining that sort of heritage of attracting people of the event. I don't think we see that there's going to be, unless we'll be working with people to develop it into a bit more of a weekend or a festival, but I don't think we'd be bringing in huge infrastructure. We sort of set things up, so we're working with that environment gently and thoughtfully so that it works on a sustainability point of view as well, actually.
Yeah. A lot of the activations I mentioned, like M&M's and Red Bull, for example, are driven by the corporate partners that the Australian Open has. And obviously, you've announced a pretty interesting title partner for this year's race in Chanel, which is part of potentially a broader trend that you're seeing, kind of luxury brands coming into sport. What was it that drew Chanel to the boat race and vice versa as well? Because I'm assuming that there was kind of mutual interest in making this partnership happen.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what did attract them? I think one of the really fantastic things about this relationship with Chanel is they like the event as it is. They really like the heritage. They value the equality. So, of course, Gabrielle Chanel set up the company, 100 years ago, at a time when she was innovating with women's clothing. I mean, we've got an event here now where there's men and women competing on the same platform on the same day with the same coverage. And we're celebrating 10 years of that, which is really exciting. So 10 years ago, 2015, and good on the BBC as well at the time to really support that. I think they were ahead of the game, actually, and with Claire Balding there as well, really recognising that if the women were coming to the Tideway, they were going to be treated equally. And, there are few events that can still say that, actually. And by comparison, we're a very small business. So we're really proud of that. So we're celebrating 10 years of that. And I think they recognise that whilst we are heritage and we look after that piece that we have really strongly in our traditions, we are also not afraid to innovate carefully. And in 2015, that was really thoughtfully done. And we've seen the benefits of that for sure. I mean, we have pretty much it's 49 51 men, women watching the event. So we're sort of really equal there, where a lot of sports don't see that. We're in many territories, so we're sort of global, which is great. And it's the quality of the racing is really high, partly because of the great coaching they receive that fits around their studies and the support that we get as well. So I think they could see that it's a partnership of values as well. So this isn't being led in the same way by let's just look at what we can do with it. So how we can work together very carefully and slowly, which is really exciting for us. So they really appreciate, because they're a timing partner as well, the imagery that goes with the rowing. Timing is everything. Crews working together really carefully. You've got to balance weight. So there's all those things that are sort of the images of it, and actually the values of the sport as much as that. So I think we found a real alignment there, which is really exciting. And yeah,
Yeah.
we're
As you're
thrilled.
describing that, it makes me think like Chanel is probably going through a lot of the same challenges in terms of having to balance that history and legacy with innovation, right? Because there's all these opportunities for them to potentially innovate in loads of different ways to reach younger audiences, etc. But they also have a really, really steep and rich history to protect, which is a lot of what drives their value. And so they need to be careful not to completely ditch that in chasing new trends and then but just become another commodity.
Yeah, totally. I mean, 2026, they'll be celebrating 100 years in London. So there's some really nice pieces there. But you're right, it's keeping that balance really thoughtfully. And, it seemed to be that they've done a pretty good job of that, because it's not easy in this day and age.
Yeah. So how are they going about looking to activate with you? I assume there's going to be a lot of their branding at the event as the title partner. You mentioned the
Yeah.
timing as well with the watches, and I assume that will be quite heavily kind of emphasized as the races are happening. But like, are there any kind of like unique ways that you're looking to activate together, or anything that they were particularly interested to kind of attach themselves to? Like one example from outside of Chanel, with this broader trend of luxury fashion, is LVMH have really focused on the trophy cases. That seems to be like an area that they've really gone after. So I'm just curious.
I think you're going to be surprised. I think people are going to be really surprised. We're working with an organization that want to learn about the event and get a really deep understanding before they would suggest anything. And because they like the event, it's going to be a very gentle year. So this year is all about learning more about us, understanding the sport, what's important to the event, what's important to the athletes. And so I think you're going to be surprised on Boat Race Day that actually this is a very different kind of partnership, in that sense that there will be branding, but it won't be the amount that we may see the style that other people do it. Beautifully done, of course, but carefully and thoughtfully done. And which again, works well for us too. It's a big course, and what you see there will be placed carefully, but there won't be the kind of levels of branding that maybe you might be expecting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think through this year of looking at what's important, then we can sort of learn together around where do we see this going and what makes sense going forwards, rather than rushing into anything. So I think it'll be, watch this space and see how it develops actually in that way, which is really exciting actually.
Yeah. How does it differ from maybe previous title partners that you've had? Because I think your previous partner was Gemini, which was a crypto brand, but was, if I'm right, founded by the Winklevoss twins, who obviously have a deep love for rowing. So I'm guessing that was what drew them to the sport.
That was a real sort of partnership of valuing the event. Again, it's sort of people who can really see that, that they're obviously heavily invested in the event, having raced in it, which is amazing. And again, they were very light touch actually in many ways compared to other things. You might see at other events in terms of branding and activation as well. They really regarded the event, as bespoke, and they could see that it worked. They enjoyed it. They came to it. They could see the value for itself as an entity, which was also great. I mean, I think before that with BNY, that was obviously with Newton and Helen Morrissey, and that was around talking about that equality piece. So again, you would have seen branding per se, but actually it was about the narrative around it rather than changing the event. I mean, that's one of the great things about it, isn't it? We can evolve it, but we don't need to change it. It's that sort of heritage mystique piece, isn't it? That it wouldn't be the boat race if it wasn't Oxford and Cambridge. It would be someone else's race, which is fine. But this is just what this is.
Yeah, I think you referenced Wimbledon right at the start when you were sort of talking about nostalgically kind of like watching sport on TV. And Wimbledon is another great example of a sport that's got some amazing commercial partners, but doesn't over expose them at its events.
It's a beautiful thing. And even when you go there, when you have, and again, they have the queue to get in, they've got some great things there. You've got, obviously got the hospitality, but you've got real access points and you go into the venue and it's just beautifully done, isn't it? The whole space. I have to say, actually, I had the very great privilege of meeting an absolute sports hero of mine, Martina Navratilova, who again, I followed avidly as a kid. And actually, she's a fellow of one of the colleges at Cambridge, and she came to row with the women's team a few years ago. And I have to say, it was quite an overwhelming moment to actually be in the same space as her. So it's great how worlds can collide. So yeah, and again, a real leader in sport, actually, Martina. One to be really admired. But it was interesting, again, because she sort of retired from that frontline sport. The students didn't quite appreciate how amazing she was until I kind of filled them in on everything she's done. They're so young.
Yeah, in terms of like that appreciation or respect for kind of like sporting accomplishments, like you mentioned earlier about the kind of difficulty of the course. But obviously, for people that are tuning in for the first time on the BBC and haven't watched a rowing race before, they're going to assume that all rowing is exactly like this because that's the only race they've seen. So I'm curious, and you mentioned a docuseries as well. So I'm curious, how do you leverage content, I guess, to try and educate audiences in a way that's entertaining enough that they want to watch and want to learn, but also fill them in that like, oh, by the way, this is difficult because of X, and like this is the challenge that they're overcoming, and this is why that's not normal or that's not what would usually happen, kind of thing. Because I'm guessing there's a little bit of a challenge around audience education where you've got some people that are diehard fans that don't need you to explain what a cox is. And then you've got other people that are like, what's the person doing at the front of the boat? Like, why are they shouting at everyone? So how do you kind of navigate that kind of, I guess, broad range of audience that have wildly different experiences and understanding of the event and of the sport?
Yeah, no, and it's a really good point. And I think those people in rowing, and because the boat race, even the boat race company, we're made up of lots of alumni. And when we're talking about it, we can assume a lot of knowledge, but of course, it's better to not assume that and actually to engage and communicate more effectively. I think we're really fortunate that with Claire Balding, Andrew Cotter, and the rest of the team who do the coverage, they really communicate the sport really well and draw that out from the people they're interviewing and the pundits that come along. I think for us, actually, that's obviously on the day, but in advance of that, to the point, turning the tide. So our team of Ben Tufnell and Tom Ransley, they have sort of been embedded with the team. We did a series last year, so everyone can get it on YouTube now still to go and have a look. But again, they're sort of embedded with the teams. And what the advantage with that is actually because Ben has been taking photos of the teams and covering some media pieces the last few years since 2021. The coaches are very relaxed with him and Tom, and the students sort of trust him being around and almost don't notice him, actually, which is in a complimentary way. He's sort of one of the teams, which is great. And so he covers that. And I think around that is sort of trying to draw out. And that's partly why we've taken it on. We did some short form content prior to that, but we just felt the longer form content would be better to kind of educate and to inform people in a more interesting way. And so you don't get to assume things. So it's, to understand the lives of these young people that are doing this, the difficulty. I think we're still learning how to communicate that because people watch a 2K straight course, but actually that's actually pretty difficult to steer. So if you speak to any coxes, but in other ways, we need a whole language like a dictionary, because why is it called an 8 when there are 9 people in it? And why is it called rowing and not sculling? What's the difference? And when you go to watch the Olympics, which is an amazing summer this year, of course, but there are 2 disciplines. There's the rowing with 1 oar and the sculling with 2 oars. What's the difference and why don't we do this? So we're sort of back with that traditional craft. And you're right, it's a really difficult course. You're rowing on water that is moving really quickly because it's coming in on the tide and it swirls. The tideway is a difficult stretch of water. It's wavy, so it's not flat, it's not contained, it's not still. Even putting your blades in on the start, what people find really interesting is the start of the boat race course. There's not some piece of high tech down there. It takes a few hours. I mean, there's a great team who put, with the Port of London Authority, these sinkers in the water and these little boats that you'll see on the TV, these little boats with people in them that hold on to the eights. And the start of the boat race is an incredibly difficult thing to do. And of course, you say when you watch it on the TV, they make it look really easy. But actually, it's incredibly difficult for the coxers to line the crews up on water that's moving really fast, in the wind. And then you probably don't put your blades in the water, because if you do, you're going to steer the boat. And so these technical elements, we really do need to communicate around those to engage people with what's going on so they can understand. And also the endurance element of it. I think we've seen the last few years when you've been watching it, some of the athletes have collapsed at the end. You know, they are trained to push their body really hard, but 20 minutes, it's not a race where you start out and you go and even pace it. It's a 2-horse race. You have to go out as hard as you can and hope that at some point you're ahead of the other crew and then hang on. You know, we have seen last year's women's race was incredibly exciting when Oxford got ahead and then Cambridge came back through them. Incredibly tightly fought. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to do. It's a difficult thing to train for. It's a difficult thing to win, actually.
Yeah, and you can say that with authority because you've done it yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we sort of, a lot of the time, I mean, it's a lot of fun as well. So I think sometimes we're talking about all this difficulty piece, but all these challenges that come with it are really, I think the students would say they do have a lot of fun. It is challenging, but they do enjoy it. And this experience of doing something like this is life-changing. Whatever, you develop really close bonds with the team that you're on. You know, they're with them out there early morning, 8 at night. You get to know your teammates really well. Within probably 3 or 4 weeks, you have a really deep understanding of each other without really having to say anything. And I think some of those things that actually you just take with you for life, actually.
Yeah. Obviously, the students can't stay at university forever. They might be there for 3 or 4 years. So how often is the team and the personnel of a team changing?
It changes every year. So there are some, you know, people who will be there for 3 or 4 years, or maybe doing an undergrad and then doing a master's and a PhD. There are some, let's say maybe a third of the team are consistent. And then the people coming in, or maybe just doing it for 2 years and then moving on because at a particular point in their academic journey, they focus on their academics stuff and the sport. So actually, this is what's the real challenge for the coaches. I mean, the clubs, both Oxford and Cambridge, have world-class coaches. This job is really difficult. It's, you know, your results are displayed publicly, and your crew could have the best row ever, could have their best performance on boat race day and still not win. You know, we see that in sport. That's kind of what it is. But it's a very publicly exposing point. And also, it's a very short season. So it's 6 months. They don't have the students all the time. They've got full-time courses. So training is managed around the academic schedule. And you're blending to that point. You're bringing in new people who you need to upskill very quickly in the style of rowing. I mean, rowing technically is the same, but they have different emphasis from the coaching point of view of how your style or how you want people to row together. And so you're sort of blending people who maybe have learnt to row the last couple of years with people who may have come off the back of an Olympics or World Championships, and you're sort of blending all that together. So it's a really exciting combination. But from terms of the coaching setup, that takes in itself a lot of skill for the coaches to bring all that together so that, you know, you're getting the best out of everybody.
Yeah, because I can imagine that also plays into the content. On one side of it, you've got a lot of new personalities, which means you need to tell a lot of new stories to people that are watching because they don't necessarily know them from before. So that's one challenge, is that, you know, if you're a football club, you might have 1 or 2 new signings a year, but you've got a lot of consistency where a player might have been with you for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And so you're only having to tell the story around a couple of new people rather than maybe 2/3 of the team. So on that side, it's a challenge. But I can imagine on the other side, you've got a much more relatable story to tell, in that you've got students that are balancing academia with trying to train, which is going to be a lot more relatable to the average person than maybe a footballer that's on £100,000 a week and driving off to his mansion after the game, right? So it feels like there is some like quite interesting stories you can tell. And I can imagine with the newer athletes coming through that are very like social media native, you potentially have an opportunity to tell stories on, as well as the long form docuseries, like on shorter form content that kind of lets people kind of see behind the curtain of like what it takes to train for a race.
Yeah, and some of them are really great at doing that as well. They'll produce their own stuff as well and release that. They'll give insights. Yeah, there is. And I think that's what it is. It's that human interest story which engages people. That's what engages people beyond the sort of the rowing fans. That's why it has that appeal, is because why are they doing this? Gosh, why are they doing 24 hours of training on top of that for nothing? And 50% of people in the race are going to lose. They're not going to win. The stakes are high and the demands are high. People do want to find out about that. It does mean that we have got some new stories to be able to tell that are relevant, on a different way every year. But also it's sort of partly around building up some of those relationships with people who are around a little bit longer. And then some of those will come and do the commentary. So they're able to talk about their teammates when they've just left. So you see that on the coverage as well. So it is a real challenge. And I think that's where we're different compared to regular sports teams that have a professional team. They're there for, a career, which is great. And that's what you see. And we have something completely different.
Yeah, for sure. Just to finish things off, it would be great to just end with a very broad question of what's next for you and the boat race. You mentioned the Chanel partnership is going to evolve. They're going to use this year as a year to kind of understand the event and how they fit into it. So I would assume maybe further activations will come in future years. You mentioned this being 10 years of the race being men's and women's both on the main course. The fact that there's other races, like, could we see a boat race happening in a different country or on a different course? Like, what's next for you guys?
Yeah, so it's really exciting. So a few things. We've got some really big headlines coming up. Again, this year, 10 years, as you said, but also it's the first time that we've got a woman umpiring the men's boat race this year. Sarah Winkless will be umpiring the men's boat race. She did do it in 2021, but that was when it was up at Ely. So that's another significant milestone for us this year. Very exciting. And of course, in 2027, we've got 100 years centenary of the women's boat race, which again, I think is a really exciting point. 100 years of rowing, of women's boat races. There were some gaps in between, but that's an incredible piece of heritage actually there to have as a sport and for the event. And so we'll be looking at how we can develop that. What can we do around that to engage people in the sport, to inspire new participants, to tell the story of those women? You think, that was just before the women's vote came in for over 21s. I mean, you sort of think it doesn't feel that long ago, but actually the stage of life that was in, and that does then tie in really well with Chanel, our sponsors. So that's going to be really great, I think, around that. And what can we do around that weekend? Then, of course, we've got in 2029, 200 years, the men's boat race. Now, again, that's just hugely significant just in terms of a sports event, celebrating that length of time and how it's changed, how it stayed the same, what's there. So we'll be looking at those 2 dates with real significance, sort of build out around that, and to use those as platforms for then to talk more about it, more about the existing and where we're going, what that could mean. We often get asked about traveling abroad. And the teams do go. So in October, Cambridge and Oxford went to Boston to take part in Head of the Charles, which is a huge head race. So that's a race where people race one after the other down a course, again on a windy course in Boston, which is great. So they will race there. And but because of their academic schedules, you can't just take off and go somewhere else. So it's not something we'd be looking to do at this point in time, because that, there's informal things, but nothing planned for the event itself. But I think we've got some really exciting things to come up. And so we're hoping that sort of more people will come on the journey with us and join us for that.
Yeah, those 2 anniversary dates sound super significant. And like you say, I think you mentioned Chanel maybe next year have their 100. So the fact that you're only 1 year out in terms of celebrating your 100 years, I guess, will be something you can collaborate around. Maybe somehow they celebrate their centenary and take that into your own.
Exactly. There's so many things to be able to talk about that are so shared, actually. It's just an incredible time for us together.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really fun to talk about it with you and understand a bit more about this. We have so many guests in the world of football just because that's such a dominant area of the sports commercial landscape in UK, Europe. So it's nice to have someone from rowing and representing a different sport and a different perspective. So.
Oh, that's really kind of you. Yeah, and it's a privilege for us to be here. Thanks very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. And you can also find my LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect and let me know what you thought. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.